So we're going to talk a little bit about womanness, because Ketanji Brown Jackson, who is Biden's pick to be the next member of the Supreme Court of the United States, who is well qualified for the job. She has an incredible, I don't know if they call it a CV in legal circles, but an incredible background.
Yeah, I don't think it's a CV. I think it's a resume. But.
Yeah. Okay. But somewhat famously, she was asked in the hearings this week if she could, after a little bit of back and forth, if she could define what a woman is. And she said, no, in this context, she could not define what a woman is because, quote, I'm not a biologist. Well, lucky for all of you, we are biologists.
Can you provide a definition for the word woman?
Can I provide a definition?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Yeah.
I can't.
You can't?
Not in this context.
So
I'm not a biologist.
Lucky for all of you, we are biologists. And we can define what a woman is, but I should say it doesn't take a biologist to define what a woman is. And before you interrupt,
yeah, all right.
I want to just say that I was going to cede the floor because, of course, what it is to be a woman is to be sort of deferential and to always let the man take the lead and to, probably go clean some stuff up or maybe make a cake or something. That is what it is to be a woman. Is that right?
Not an expert exactly, though I'm going to explain it because that's what it is to be a man.
But you're a biologist, which is the expert that we've been called on to seek, and we are both biologists, and yet clearly your manness should trump my womanness in answering the question on account of what now?
Well, all right. Let me start my interruption and splaining.
Explain.
I'm going to explain. Mm-hmm. I actually think her answer was perfectly justified. It's not that I think she couldn't have given the obvious answer, and that would have been equally justified. But at the current moment, I certainly understand that from the perspective of somebody for whom this is not their core interest in the world, that being asked the question to define a term like this, it's not a simple, well, it is a simple matter, but it's not necessarily obvious that it would be a simple matter because people have raised all sorts of complexities, which I will point out are irrelevant to the definition.
So I'm going to interrupt you now.
All right.
We're going to go back and forth a lot because there's a lot to say here. But I went ahead. First, what rang in my ears was Kelly J. Keane, right? The awesome British feminist, also a woman, who also goes by Posey Parker. We've both been on her show. Somehow not a biologist, and yet she seems to have a really good grasp of this. Famously says, adult human female, right? It's just not that hard. So I didn't know if this was her formulation, so I went ahead and looked it up a few places. Mm-hmm. Okay. I went onto dictionary.com, adult female person. Okay. Merriam-Webster online, also adult female person. And then I pulled out, I went for the big guns. In fact, I had to wake our producer up this morning to pull out the OED. Okay. So we happen to have a hard copy of the OED. We actually had 2 hard copies of the OED because both of our parents got these for us when we were children. And at some point we're like, we're in this for the long haul. We do not, in fact, need 2 hard copies of the Oxford English Dictionary in our home. So we only have the one at this point. Here it is. This is, of course, the box is falling apart. The second volume. This is P through Z plus the supplement and bibliography. And their definition of woman is also just take a look at the text here. This is it ain't big.
Women.
Right?
In this book have been belittled along with everything else.
Along with everything else. Yeah. And in fact, rather than use the handy magnifying glass that they include, I have magnifying glasses built into my eyes by virtue of being both myopic and presbyopic at this point. So I'm going to read their definition of woman, and it goes on for a while, but the very first definition is an adult female human being. Okay.
So wait, I want to leap in and make a point.
Go for it.
I noticed, barely saw anything on the internet this week, but Neil Oliver tweeted something about basically banking hard copies of books and documentaries and movies, things that can't be retconned, right? Because the
What does that stand for?
retroactive continuity. So part of the problem.
How is retroactive? I don't get that as the part of speech there, but okay.
Well, let's just put it to you this way. Those who wish to change a definition and pretend that it was always defined in some other way have lots of opportunity on the net. They do not have an opportunity to go back and change some book that's been collecting dust for however many decades.
I was pleased to find that the two most common dictionaries online had basically the same definition that Kelly J. Keene uses and that the OED has been using.
Right.
Yeah.
For now.
For now.
And we have seen things like the definition of vaccine changed subtly in recent months.
And anti-vaxxer, things like this.
Right, all these things. So anyway, hard copies of books are coming back because they can't be changed remotely.
Yeah. So I know you're going somewhere. You were busy explaining stuff, but I'm going to explain just a little bit more about this seemingly very simple definition.
No,
but
you're going to double explain.
Yes, I am. Yeah, yes, I am. So adult human female, right?
Yep.
There will be those then that will say, okay, then you need to define those three words. Fair enough. Can do. Adult. Of reproductive age or post-reproductive age. In any organism, right? We talk about juveniles, we talk about adults. And is the border
post-attainment of reproductive age?
Yeah. Is the border going to be somewhat fuzzy? Are there differences even within the United States about what the age of consent is? Is reproductive age at the point of first menses, or is it the point of peak fertility? It's not peak fertility, but
or the average age of first reproduction of the species, as it turns out, for senescence purposes.
Yeah, and given that we're just marching that earlier because we're overfeeding and over hormonizing our girls in particular, then that's changing.
Harmonizing.
Yes, it's not a word, but I just tried it out. It doesn't really work. But adult, okay, but having attained, I think probably this is going to be it. The average age of attainment of reproductive capacity in a species. That does mean that there will be species where adults of males and females are going to be different, right? There's going to be some years in some cases where usually it will be the females have attained reproductive capacity before the males. Human or person, because we see both of those in these very simple 3-word definitions of what it takes to be a woman, of what a woman is. And there's going to be a lot of ink spilled as to exactly what this is, but the simplest thing I would say is any living organism in the genus Homo is a human. Okay, that's going to exclude a whole lot of humans, but in terms of like, are we looking at a woman here? Like, if it's a living person, if it's of a living organism in the genus Homo, that's a person you're looking at. Those are pretty simple. Female is going to be the one where people get their panties in a wad.
Shape. Their knickers in a twist is the way we say that without getting evicted from the internet.
No, but if we were across the pond, we would get evicted from, we'd have to just keep hopping across the pond depending on which of these we want to say. So, female, okay? Adult human female is what a woman is. And that does hinge on what you take to be the definition of female. And luckily, this is a place where biologists know a thing or two. The answer is not complex. There's lots of complexifying things around the edges, which I'm sure we'll get to talking about. But the fact is that the female of a species is that individual that can or will or has in the past produce eggs. Eggs being gametes, the sex cells, that are larger than the other kind of gamete and tend to be sessile. They're rich with cytoplasm and they don't tend to move around much. By comparison, the male of the species produces gametes that are little and tend to be mobile or motile in the language of sperm. So in plants, we call them pollen, and in animals, we call it sperm. But if you have or will or have in the past had the capacity to produce little tiny zippy gametes, then you're male and therefore not a woman. And if you have, or will, or have in the past, had the capacity to, or could have had the capacity to, absent some other problem, produce larger cytoplasm-rich, largely immobile gametes, then you are female. And thus, if the other two things apply, if you are both an adult and a human, you're a woman.
So, a number of things. One, if I wanted to, I could throw all sorts of challenges at the definitions you just gave.
Please
right?
do then.
Well, this would be an exercise in sophistry, and I think once again we have to recognize that the central question here is one of sophistry. Right? The whole idea that we are somehow compelled to define woman, a term that everybody knows the definition of, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of people are now pretending they don't. But the point is that we get dragged into this is the result of sophistry. Now, I think it's very important that we actually respond in this case because of the claim that it's because I'm not a biologist that I can't answer the question. Although, again, I will defend that answer. I think that was probably the right thing for her to say. Because the problem is a layperson does not know what to do with the meaning of the ambiguities, right? In other words, if I take, let's say Sarah from the Bible, right?
Okay.
Is Sarah a woman?
I don't know the Bible. I don't know if you've picked a weird example here.
Well, I've picked a person that we don't know existed, right? She may be a Bible story. Okay. Right. And therefore, she may be a depiction of an adult human female. But that doesn't mean that she is a woman, or if the story...
Is the story of Sarah in the Bible include her having born children?
No. The person in the Bible, I'm picking Sarah because she is a female biblical name, right, who shows up in the Bible, I believe, in adulthood. Now, if the story depicts her entire life, she is born, which probably it does, then the question is Sarah a woman? Well, then we could get into pedantic stuff about the fact that the story depicts her entire life. Anyway, I'm not arguing any of this is important because we all understand exactly how you deal with that ambiguity under normal circumstances if you didn't have enemies trying to cloud the issue. So my only point is we are being dragged into a world of sophistry. Somebody being dragged into a world of sophistry has the right to simply refuse to participate. And that right will be abused. Many people will refuse to answer questions that we pose about important things by claiming that we are engaged in sophistry. They will be wrong. We don't engage in sophistry. But the point is, in a world of landmines, this answer that actually, okay, if we're going to get technical about what a woman is, then maybe we ought to bring in a biologist, strikes me as a reasonable answer to the question, as much as I would have preferred her to say adult human female, right? I would prefer it, but I think, for example, I saw Eric tweeted.
Eric, your brother.
Yes, tweeted a response to this. And his point was basically the one we are making. This is not a difficult question. But he included in his definition an exclusion for intersex people, which is absolutely unnecessary, right? I understand why he did it, right? Because there can be ambiguities that blur boundaries. You and I would point to gametes as the defining characteristic, and nobody, as far as we know, produces both gametes. But even if they did, right, that's not inconceivable. Even if they did, the point is these nuances do not change the fundamental definition. And I would point, as you and I taught repeatedly when we were professors, the fact that you cannot, you've got a mountain, you've got a valley. At some point, you've gone down the mountain far enough to be in the valley, but there's no way to define what moment that is. Does that mean mountains and valleys are a social construct? No. The river's in the valley. It's not on the mountaintop, right? So, yeah,
this category though is a hell of a lot less fuzzy than that. As I have said many times, many places, written many essays on this. And as we have talked about, as we have written into the book and all, gender is the software to the hardware of sex. Sex is binary, and yes, there are some mistakes in humans. Mistakes, developmental mistakes or genetic mistakes. But just like having zeros and ones in your machine code, and then occasionally having missing data or a question mark doesn't render it non-binary. Sex is still binary. Gender being the software of sex means, basically the behavioral expression of sex. And are there lots of, do I have a lot of gender nonconformity? In part because I grew up with a dad who did a lot of stuff that I thought was really cool, and I wanted to, do the kinds of things he was doing. Yeah. Does that in any way call into question whether or not I'm either a woman or a female? No. Well, it makes me perhaps less feminine, which might be the gender description of sex stereotypical traits, but that's fine. And that says absolutely nothing about the underlying reality of whether or not I am a female or male, woman or man.
But you are hearing me say something that I am not saying. My point is those rare exceptions exist. Even if they were common, it wouldn't matter. It is not necessary to include an exemption for them because the definition works as it into the passage of electricity through a circuit, right? But it is not hard to come up with examples that, one could argue either way, right?
Well, you've picked an example that I have exactly zero history with. I mean, I've built some electric circuits and all, but you ask me to define, the distinction between electric and electronic, and you have only defined one of them even. So you only did half the job here. I don't inherently know. I have a sort of a gist of a feeling for what the difference is. But I really think that, in part because that is a human-made system, reasonable people can disagree more compellingly than, and not only is the system human-made, but the categorizations are human-made. And the fact is that female exists as a category completely outside of whether or not humans exist. Because what the definition of woman is includes the word human in it. Woman doesn't exist outside of human, but it exists outside and long before humans ever had any idea of what it was. And frankly, everyone knew it. People weren't wandering around going like, I don't know, male, female, I can't tell. Like no one was doing that.
Right.
But this is not confusing.
Right. This is sophistry.
But electric, electronic, I feel like this actually plays into their hands to be talking about systems that are specifically, at least in the case of electronic, anthropogenic.
But I think, again, you're hearing me say exactly the opposite thing that I'm saying. Electric versus electronic is a fair distinction, even though there are cases in which I can poise something just on the cusp. So it could go either way, like a telegraph key, right? A telegraph key just completes a circuit over some long distance, right? And it's used to send simple messages, right? Like we are under attack. So the point is it's by its design, it's an electrical circuit, but it's playing the role of an electronic circuit. And you could argue it either way. But the point is somebody who would pull out that example and say, well, you are falsely drawing a world of electric versus electronic stuff, right? That person would be engaged in sophistry. The point is there are a tiny number of examples. Yes, we could, we could agree that a light bulb is electrical and not electronic. And then we could agree that if I leave a particular light on, that it means something, right? So we can poise things on that cusp without actually challenging the fundamental nature of definitions. And the point is, if you apply the same standard the sophists are using, then we wouldn't be able to talk about anything.
True. Absolutely true. I just think that it is further confusing and further adding fuel to the insane fire that is somehow erupting around all of us now, to use by comparison to an ancient truth. So there have been two sexes for something between 1 and 2 billion years with a B. Whether or not our lineage has been sexually reproducing that entire time is not totally clear. We can't go back in time with that amount of clarity. Probably so. But we can know for sure for at least 500 million years we have been reproducing sexually. So to say, but okay, here's some examples from a sphere that is, electric exists outside of humans, but electronic doesn't. And, we have created electronic systems to be using two definitions, one of which does exist outside of humans, one of which doesn't. It just muddies the waters. I don't feel that this is a useful comparison, because it precisely contributes to the idea that some of these people will call themselves postmodernists. Some of them will call, they'll have lots of names for themselves, but, the gender queer, lots of names. But the idea that you are what you say you are, that female is just a feeling, that humans can be sequential hermaphrodites, no, and no. It's just entirely false.
Of course, which is why I'm saying the definition is adult human female, and saying something like excluding intersex people, the definition is adult human female, is unnecessary, because adult human female covers it, no matter what. Even if you had somebody who produced both kinds of gametes, that you and I would agree is a special case.